recording here, and I will start admitting people. And as soon as we get people settled in here, we can get going.
Oh my God.
Good.
There's
I
a
just-
lot that expressed interest and that have signed up, so hopefully everybody will.
I just
have a lot here
lost you.
signed up,
That is
so.
always happening to me.
Yep.
I was stuck waiting and waiting and waiting, and time was going by. I left and came back
Yep.
to get
Hi,
in.
Claire.
Okay, we're up and
Thank
running now.
you.
So I would like to ask though, everybody, before we get started, this just keeps down confusion because we're also doing Facebook Live. So if everybody would just keep their mics muted and their videos off. If you do have a question, please use the chat. I'll be monitoring that, and I will ask the question or your comment. It just keeps you from accidentally popping up on the Facebook Live
Right.
and the recording here, because we are recording on here as well. So with that being said, I would like to thank everybody for joining us. At
Chris,
Free
I've
Thinkers Corner.
lost you.
Oh, all right, hang on a second.
We hear you and see
I
you.
know. Can you see me? Because I can't see you.
Yeah, we see you.
Happens every once in a while.
I see everyone.
I see
Mhm.
everyone.
Yep, yep, I think we're all good.
Well, I'm not good because I can't see a thing, but
Oh, we
Who
can
is it
see
that-
you. Can you hear us? You can hear us, right?
I can hear you
Oh,
beautifully.
you probably need to click on something, but I
I
don't know
think-
what.
I think Chris probably needs to readmit me somehow.
You better come out and come back in again, yeah.
I just did that, but I'm not getting in.
Oh,
I see you and hear you fine.
That's so weird. Okay, well,
and you have your video on the button on the bottom, right,
Yep,
left.
yep.
Huh.
well, such is life.
Okay, but we can see you. Can you hear me okay though?
Oh yeah, I can hear you beautifully.
That's interesting. huh?
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
that is weird. Okay, so again, welcome everybody to a Free Thinkers Corner and Sisters in Crime. Tonight's presentation is called Casting Call. This is our final Sisters in Crime virtual writers workshop for the summer, which this particular workshop focuses on how to create compelling characters. Our panel today consists of 4 mystery writers from the Sisters in Crime New England group: Judy Copek, Jeannette de Beauvoir, I hope I said that right, Kate Flora, and Barbara Struna.
Right.
I'll let you all go ahead and introduce yourselves and take it away.
Okay, I guess since I'm the blind moderator here, I will
It's a
ask.
mystery.
It is a mystery. Well, that's how life goes, right? I think I should ask each of you, starting with Jeannette and then Judy and then Barbara, to just, give a tiny bit of background about what you write so that our audience will know what kinds of characters we might be looking at.
All right, thanks, Kate. My name's Jeannette de Beauvoir, so Chris is pretty close as anyone really ever gets. And I write primarily mysteries, but also some historical fiction. And a lot of my mysteries do involve some sort of history in them as well. So I'm always very conscious of writing characters that are, insofar as I can make it, true to their time. Judy?
Hey, I write mysteries. I've written one romantic suspense and another woman in jeopardy novel. So and I do not have a series, which is probably a sad thing, but I don't. Anyway, that's what I write. And I've done a memoir and short stories and poetry and all kinds of stuff, but writing novels is my primary occupation.
Barbara?
Oh, I write historical fiction, and my stories have mysterious elements, but they're mostly suspense, because you usually know who my bad guys are, but you don't know which route they're going to take and how they're going to affect other people. So there is some elements of mystery, but usually it's always back and forth, present day to the past, back and forth.
Sounds like a challenge. I'm Kate Flora, and I write strong women, amateur female PI, the sort of, the woman who rescues herself and solves mysteries. And I also write police procedurals. as well as a long list of other kinds of things. But those are the two primary areas in the mystery field in which I play. So I think that, going back and starting our round, Jeannette, when you, are your mysteries multiple point of view or single point of view?
I write a single point of view, and I write almost all of my work is in the first person, which I know gives you some real limitations in terms of letting the audience in on what's happening sort of elsewhere in the book and the story. But I like the personal kind of inward looking, inner thoughts, all that sort of thing that you get by writing in the first person. And that way also, since almost all of my books have some sort of mysterious element to them, the audience, the readers, can discover things at the same time as my main character is discovering them. So there's this sort of symbiotic then relationship between the reader and the character.
What about you, Judy?
Normally I write either first person or third person, but in my Woman in Jeopardy, Chased by Death, for the first time I had 3 narrators, one main narrator and 2 others. And I had a drug lord and the evil sister. And it was so much fun to write bad people. I just never realized I would enjoy it that much. You could just be bad for, and get it all down. But mostly it's, last novel was first person, again, which I tend to lean on.
Right. And what about you,
And
Barbara?
I usually write my a present day character is always written in first person. And when I switch to the rest are all third person, and usually that's in the past. And if they're my villains in present day are written in third person also, but it's always clearly labeled and goes by chapter, and I never put them together in the same chapter.
Well, you've already brought up what I think is a fascinating challenge for all of us in terms of how we let the readers know who is speaking, who is the central character, or who owns any particular scene. I was very much surprised to discover, without knowing anything when I started, as many of us don't, that I wrote my Thea Kozak mysteries, the female, strong female, in first person, and the Joe Burgess police procedurals in third person. I think it's, and I'm assuming, and perhaps wrongly, and you guys can correct me, that our audience listening will know that when we say first person, we're saying I, and when we write third person, we're saying he. And when we're talking about multiple points of view, it can be, it's got to be third. I think it's going to be terribly confusing if you have 2 eyes in the same book, but what do the rest of you think?
I'll answer that a little bit. I have several books that are, as I believe Barbara's expressing, dual timeline kinds of things, where I've got chapters alternating between the present and the past. And I actually do keep all of it in the first person. I really do trust my readers a lot to be able to figure that out. And again, I think it, and I think I've heard that it's pretty clear, but it's interesting because I do like reading what Barbara's talking about, going between the first person and the third person, because I do think that gives you the distance into history that you might not have otherwise. And maybe I'm doing it in the first person just because that's where I'm really comfortable and like to stay where I'm really comfortable. But I do acknowledge that makes a whole lot of sense in terms of distance.
Right. Okay. So we supposedly, I mean, our task for tonight is to tell our listeners how to create a compelling character. So starting with a protagonist, we'll get to antagonists, bad guys, and peripheral characters. What kind of attributes did you choose to make your central character somebody that a reader's going to want to spend time with? And at this time, we'll start with Barbara.
Well, I know my present day character didn't start out as a series when I first wrote the first book. And then when it was at the publisher, I decided, I can take this woman further and she'll be the vehicle that moves you through all the stories, always finding something. And then the next chapter, you're going to meet the character who put that item there, whatever time period it is taking place, and the story's told that way. So I have her, a pretty down-to-earth person who is growing from the first book, not knowing exactly what she's doing. The second book, she's much better at it, but yet she still is an amateur at it and doesn't purport to be a specialist or a crime investigator, but she knows what she's doing. So I try to relate her to somebody 40 and up, let's say that. They're always 40. She starts out at 40. I think she's about 60 now, but we got to move her along with no kids, I think. Get the kids out of the way so she can have more fun. Danger.
So is yours a series?
It is a series, right? But she's the series. This main
Yeah.
character in present day is the series.
Right.
And she finds something, and then you just go back and forth and figure out what the heck she's looking. Sometimes they connect, and there's always a good ending, but yeah, she's the series that moves you along. So I'm going to keep her going.
Right. So Judy, you write, you don't write series, you write individual characters. Tell me about one, or tell us about one of your characters and why you chose that person and what attributes you gave him or her in order to make your reader stay with her or him.
Okay, in Chased by Death, there was Maxine, who had finalized her divorce and had dinner with her husband and kind of worried about something, and went back to check on their house and found her husband's corpse. And it just took off from there. And she had a tragic history, which we don't learn about until about the middle of the book, but she had a lot of problems. She had a sister. She's looking for her long lost sister all the way through the book until she finds her and wishes she hadn't. But she's a strong character. In high school, she swam, and she still swims, and she saved herself by swimming in the book. And she's tall, but has no children, but she's very fond of children. And she gets along very well with her boyfriend's little girl. And she adopts a cat that's going to be taken to the shelter and killed. So I tried to make her sympathetic. And she's a pretty good cook, but not crazy about it. And she's not unusual in a lot of ways, but she's strong. And again, she comes from a technology background. She was a systems analyst. And so she's pretty familiar with the tech she has to deal with, but she's not crazy or overwhelmed with it. She can kind of take it or leave it. And I thought that would probably be good for a lot of people.
Right. Jeannette, what about a character that you'd like to tell us about?
So the series that I'm working on currently, I knew at the beginning it would be a series. And so I was able to make some decisions about my protagonist that could indeed carry on throughout the series. As it's interesting, Barbara, that you talk about the age. I remember reading Agatha Christie somewhere said she wished she had started Miss Marple earlier because she was running out of years for her. So I made mine in her 30s. I gave her enough time. But I also wanted to have an interplay between my main character and the venue. So these mysteries take place in Provincetown on Cape Cod, which is where I live. And it's a tourist town. And a lot of us who live here kind of, we have what's called Augustitis by the time it's time for the tourists to leave. And so I wanted to give readers a sense of that as well. So I've made her a little bit sarcastic, a little bit edgy about, all of this invasion that we get every summer. So that there's a sense of her as a person, as apart from just someone who happens to happen upon dead bodies, which of course doesn't really happen in Provincetown, I hope. But to give her this sense, to give readers an interesting character to follow. So they'd want to see what happened when she met somebody and started a relationship with him, so that they would be interested when she talked about her very tenuous and difficult relationship with her mother, which, you know, in a sense aren't specific to the mystery, but as they're woven in throughout the series, I think it gives people more of a reason to want to see what happens next to her, besides finding yet another dead body. Now, how about you, Kate?
Well, you know, I did not, when I started writing Thea Kozak, think that I was writing a series, and so I didn't have the opportunity that you have had of sort of, you know, shaping the thing from the beginning. I sort of wrote it because I wanted to tell a particular story about her younger sister who was adopted, who was murdered, and did the adoption have something to do with the reason that she was killed? And ended up having people come back to me afterwards and say, we really love Thea, we want to see more of her. And that's how she became a series character. But I probably would have made a set of different decisions. And I probably, and this is one of those things that, you know, nobody talked about this until years later, writing a character journal, a character diary, or character notebook, so that you keep track of all the attributes that you give your character, so that later on you don't change their eye color or their birthday or their backstory. Backstory is always such an important issue. I mean, I think about, you know, the book about screenwriting called Save the Cat, in which the idea is that very early on, you have the character do something which bonds them to the reader. They do something kind, or they do something brave, or they do something generous, or they do something unusual. And this good act causes the reader to think, oh, I want to spend time with this person because they have these attributes. I think that we talking about Provincetown raised a really interesting question, which is a little off the point of, you know, compelling character, but is sort of a thing that plays in very much to the creation of character, and that is setting as character. That is the place that we choose to set our mystery and put our person and sort of launch them in the book. You've talked about Provincetown. Judy, what have you used setting in a way that sort of, I mean, you used Burning Man.
Well, whenever we take a vacation, it usually turns into a book, which happened in Hans' hometown in former East Germany, Burning Man. The last one was a coast-to-coast trip in a van. And then in my current book, Murder in the North Woods, it was where my kids used to go to scout camp. I think setting is very important. You know, if you can really get a good setting and put the characters in there, and either they're comfortable or maybe they're not, which is even better, that is so important. And you can do a lot with setting. And, you know, what kind of bars are there? Are the kids well behaved? Are there lots of low life? Are there immigrants? I mean, who is there and why are they there? And I think that's really a good thing to take into consideration. In fact, I figured well where the setting is before I start the book and figure out the characters and the plot, because that lends so much. And, you know, you can't put New York City folks down in the boondocks. Well, you can, that would probably make a good book, but hence Schitt's Creek.
I was going to say, the setting really plays a very important part in all of my books, because I love history and I want my readers to step into my present day lady's shoes as she drives around the Cape or wherever she is. And they often tell me that I know just where you're going, and I know that street, and I know where that place is, and I'm going to go visit that beach and so on. And so I try to make the setting as special as possible, because it's just loaded with history, especially around, you know, anywhere actually, but really predominantly there's a lot of history on the Cape. And everywhere you look, there's a little mysterious door in a house that you wonder, why did that person put that door there? And there's always a mysterious element. So setting is important. I go from California to Alaska to all across the country as she travels, because she's got a lot of kids. She follows her children, and that's where they take her to different places. So setting's important for me.
Okay, so we have talked a bit about our main characters and about, some of the attributes. Is she strong? Does she have a professional background? So let's take one more round about that, and then we can talk about bad guys. So thinking about our main characters, what attributes, what background? Are those of you who write historical mysteries, are your characters historians? IT professionals? My character obviously is a cop. So, what do I need? What do we need to know to make a cop likable or compelling or unlikable? So talk to me a little bit, and I can't see you, so you're just going to have to take turns. Talk to me a little bit about what attributes you felt were necessary to give your central character so that they could solve a mystery.
I'll answer that first, Kate. I think that my main concern with all of my mysteries, whether they are historical or not, was to give my character a job where she had some flexibility. Because you can't exactly solve mysteries if you're working 9 to 5, or you can, I suppose, but it'd be more challenging. So in my Montreal series, I made up a profession, which was the director of publicity for the city. So that enables her to talk to the police and talk to all sorts of visitors and be out and about in the city and have reasons to have some of these things brought to her attention. My current Provincetown series, my protagonist is actually a wedding planner at one of the inns in Provincetown, which again gives her some flexibility. She's not behind the desk. She can go out and visit with people. She can take people around and show them the sights. And she has contacts throughout sort of all of the strata of people who live here, so that she knows the cops very well. She knows restaurant owners, she knows the fishermen, she knows the people who work in the museums, she knows the artists, she knows all these people, which enables her therefore to sort of be able to find answers, I think, more quickly and certainly more interestingly. So the first thing that I looked for was just that flexibility. And once I got that, then some of the other things did kind of fall into place, because there's a certain personality that can do different jobs, and so that helped me forge her in both of those series.
Sure. Judy, are your characters mostly IT background, because that's your background?
Yes, almost all of them. And I discovered early on, that having them in the office is about the most boring thing you can do, unless it's a fist fight at a meeting or something. And so I take great pains to get them out of the office and into the world, either a bar or a gym or a party or somewhere where it won't be so dull. And that works out pretty well. The latest one, Murder in the North Woods, she does get stuck in the office, but it's an office with a lot of conflict and computer problems, and there's things going on that she's supposed to try to find out. And that works pretty well. She's given a terrible chair because they're undercover and they think she's just a little administrator. And she doesn't have a laptop to take notes on. And she's really at the bottom of the heap. And so, she's very aggravated, and she's wearing old used clothes because she's not supposed to show that she has any money. And so there's always fun things that you can do to aggravate a character, which is not necessarily part of the plot, but you're showing their character. And this is a woman who gets aggravated fairly easily, like her creator.
Right. Yes, like her creator. We all certainly give our characters some of our attributes. Barbara?
I think the main my character, I wanted to make her extremely curious. That's what she has to be. She has a very she's got a curious background, and she's always willing to take that extra step off the beaten path, and not necessarily knowing maybe this is dangerous, but no, I can handle this. She's taking self-defense. She knows what she's doing. And she just does a lot of research, finds out historical and the old house that she lives in. But I think it's basically curiosity that will get her into trouble more likely than not. And a lot of people can relate to that because they want to do that, but they're not always ready to step off that path,
That's
go
right.
the other
Right.
way to check it out.
Sure, I
She
have
will.
I've read that that one of the reasons that people like to read mysteries is that they get to live vicariously
Right.
through our characters in the dangerous and scary situations we put them in.
Should I open the door or nah? Yeah, I'm
Don't go
going to
down
open
to the
that door. Are
basement,
you kidding?
Don't
Right,
open that door.
right.
Of course
Can
I'm
I-
going to open it.
Can I just ask you, Kate, why you decided to work within police procedurals, which to me is very, very scary because you have to know so much.
Right.
It happened by accident, really. I mean, in order for us to write crime novels, we need to know something about how the police operate, even when our characters are amateurs. And so I was spending a lot of time with the police. So when my mystery series was dropped, and I was looking around for some new thing to write, I said, well, you know, I've been spending all this time with the cops. They fascinate me. What would it be like to try and create a protagonist who's like a middle-aged male, you know, a middle-aged guy? And that I saw that as a writing challenge. I mean, I think all of the things that we do are sort of challenges to stretch ourselves as writers. And so for me, trying to write a guy and trying to figure out what the inside of his head looked like, what, you know, what the world looked like when he would drive around in his car. Of course, I drove around in cars with cops and I spent a lot of time with cops. And then I ended up sort of unexpectedly writing nonfiction. I mean, writing true crime books with cops. And so I spent an awful lot of time inside their head in order to try and create a credible cop. And I think for all of us, you know, when we're trying to write something that we don't know as well, we research, we imagine, we try. But once a cop said that he thought that I understood cops better than many cops understood themselves.
Oh,
And I said,
Nice
I've done it.
compliment. Yeah.
That was an incredible
Wow.
compliment. So it's probably, I mean, we can always come back to our protagonists because we love them. But I think it would be fun to talk about, you know, some of the other people that you have to have in a mystery in order to write a mystery or a thriller or a suspense or even a romantic suspense. And let's start with, I don't know whether we want to call them bad guys or antagonists because there are both.
Yeah.
But would you like to start with bad guys?
Me?
I don't.
Sure.
Whoever.
Well, you know what? I could start. I guess I don't remember where I heard this, but your villains are the scariest when they're smiling because they at least expect, you don't know, they look like regular, average, everyday people, and boy, are they evil. But they're smiling at you and you think you're safe and everything. Those are the scariest villains, I think, that you can have in a book because it's just the unexpected.
Right. Shakespeare said a man can smile and yet be a villain, and that's very true.
Yeah.
Right, and there's the wonderful thing that we tell, you know, we tell library audiences because, you know, or bookstore audiences, which is when a bad guy gets up in the morning and brushes his teeth, he does not look in the mirror and say, oh, I am so bad, because he doesn't think so.
No, right, right.
So tell us about a bad guy, Jeannette.
Well, it's interesting because
Could be a bad gal.
or a bad,
That's true.
yes, and I've got both. I love G.K. Chesterton. I love Father Brown, and one of the reasons that I love him so much is that he made sure it was clear that there can sometimes be a very fine line between the good guy and the bad guy, and I'm using guy sort of generically there.
Generically.
That there in one of his books, Father Brown says something about, well, I tried to think of how I would do it if it were me doing it. And once I did that, of course, I figured out who it was. And for this priest to put himself in the place of a murderer was, you know, a fairly big shift in mystery fiction. And I've really tried to follow that, not just in the let's make the villain somebody that the reader won't expect or will be surprised at, which is always nice, but also make them someone who is understandable, because I think that if you just have nothing but pure evil, it becomes very cardboard-like.
Right.
Whereas if you've got a situation where at the end you can sort of see, oh my gosh, I see how that happened. I see how that came about. You'll almost have some sympathy. I think Tana French does this really well. That at the end of the book, you sort of feel like, yeah, I feel a little sorry for that person. Yes, what they did was terrible, and yes, they were punished for it and all that sort of thing. But the fact is, to be able to identify somewhat with the antagonist, I think it gives you layers to the book that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Mhm.
Judy?
Yes, I agree. I think it's important, not always, but generally to give the villain a little bit of his humanity so that he's, again, what she said, he's not all 100% evil, but mostly evil, but there's a certain part of him that is not. And I feel that that's important because otherwise, again, it becomes cardboard and we don't want that. Sometimes it's hard. In my latest book, one of the villains, it turned out, left an insurance policy for his kid after he was killed. And, just things like that where I think, well, he wasn't quite that bad. And another villain was stealing money because his wife had cancer and he was trying to get her treatment. So things like that, you can do to soften them a little bit, even though they're doing really bad things.
I was
What
going to say,
about you, Barbara?
you have to give your villain a good backstory, and make them just as important as your protagonist. You want them to, see that this villain has a story too, besides just he's not just there. He's got to have something behind him that motivates him to do things and why and so on. So, your story is only as good as how bad your villain is, or how good of a story he is, how strong he is too, or she.
How about you?
I'm thinking about making a she. I'm thinking about making a female villain. We're always talking he,
Right. I have definitely had both. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
So here's
go
a
ahead.
question for you. Do you all individually, personally, have a line that you won't cross when creating your villains? So for example, Kate, you have the police procedural. So obviously there's going to be dead bodies, things like that, versus a cozy where things are just more hinted at. Do you all have a line that you won't cross as far as what you will write about?
That's a really interesting question. I've been reading a lot of mysteries lately. And one of the things that I realized that I care about in my reading, which I also care a lot about in my writing, is a moral component. The book may be quite violent, but I want someone, usually it'll be my protagonist or team of protagonists in the police procedures. I want them to keep, to keep talking or keep showing humanity, to keep showing the impact on victims, to keep showing the the determination to get justice for people, and a deep understanding of the impact of crime, not simply on the person who is killed or injured, but also on the people around them who are sort of secondary victims. So for me, moral component is a big deal, and a book without a moral component, where a bad guy is just sort of lusting and filled with joy and delight at doing incredibly ugly things, I will not do that.
No, right. I do have a tendency, even though I don't write cozies, I have a tendency to stay away from animals, dogs, cats, or whatever, and anything violent with them or anything. I kind of not tend to do that, or even I can't get past kids, I think. So I wouldn't do that. But anything else, I think, is maybe fair game. But I'll stay away from that.
Don't hurt animals either. In fact, quite a few years ago, I had a bad guy shoot a dog, and until the couple who were reluctant to dump him in the harbor, and my writing group said, "You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't kill a dog." And so, it turned out I didn't. He was just injured, and she took him to the vet, and everything was fine. And actually, that made the story much better because, you know, then they were afraid that they would be discovered as the couple who took the dog to the vet. And this was in East Germany. So sometimes, you know, if your writing group says you can't do that because maybe they're right. And I don't do graphic sex either. I don't think very many mystery writers do, especially women, but I don't.
Oh, I think that's fascinating that no one wants to kill a dog, but it's okay to kill a person in our
Yes.
book.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
It's
we
so
kill lots
funny.
of person, but no dogs or cats.
That's right. That's right. I was reading, I rarely read my reviews, but I was reading a review of one of my books, and the person was objecting to one individual having used a swear word. And all I could think was, you're okay with us killing people, but you're not okay with the F word. This is a concern. I also don't do graphic stuff. I do want to show that when someone is murdered, it's a terrible thing. And I don't, you know, I do think that there's a certain amount of reality around that I don't, you know, I don't want to make this a drawing room sort of mystery where everything is terribly genteel. Because there's nothing really genteel about murder. However, I do think that especially for the people I've seen as my audience, that too much graphic anything is a detriment. So certainly in response to Chris's question about the villain, and this reflects what Kate was saying too, is that I want it to be a complex person. I want there to be a moral component to it. And the moment that I feel like it's crossing a line into almost caricature, that's when I, feel like I need to pull that back, because that is a line I don't want to cross. I want my characters to be as real and relatable as possible.
Yeah. Right.
That was a great question. In fact, one of the things we haven't talked about yet, and I think we've said some really useful things about bad guys, which is they have to be complex, they have to be nuanced, we have to show that they, like everybody else in the story, have reasons for doing what they did. And that their worldview, their background, and background is huge, that their background is, it really tends to shape them into what they are. I remember the first true crime that I wrote, a book called Finding Amy, which is about a murder of a young woman in Portland, Maine. One of the things that absolutely fascinated me when I was reading the trial transcripts and putting the book together was the sort of impact statements that the killer and the victim's mothers gave at sentencing. And you could tell everything about how those two young people were shaped by what their mothers had to say. The bad guy's mother talked about how terribly hard it had been for her, and the victim's mother talked about what the world had lost. It was just, it was really amazing. And, so, and it's one of the things that I think, we want to tell people when they're asking for advice about writing is, think about what you've lived and what you've seen and who you've known, because it's all the material is there for you.
I was going to ask, maybe we could ask everybody, and I'll go last, but how do you find your characters? Where do you find them? What sources do you use? But you, Kate, how do you find your character?
My characters arrive. They introduce themselves. They say, I want you to tell my story. Sometimes they sit down on a bar stool next to me and they start talking, and I realize that something terrible has just happened and I need to know what it is. I mean, really, they do. And people say, well, are they based on a person? Are they based on a particular person? In Portland, Maine, the cops will say that they're sure that Joe Burgess is based on somebody that I've never met.
Interesting.
So, but I think that, they're composites for me. And how about the rest of you?
Yeah. What about you, Jeannette?
Well, I think you're right in that a lot of things kind of inform you in the background without you being conscious of them. And so as I was, my current protagonist, as I was kind of getting to know her as I was writing the first book in the series, I did find that there were certain things that later I said, oh yeah, I know someone else who has that mannerism, or I know someone else who uses that expression, but I hadn't been terribly conscious of it because I was trying to figure out who this person was. And in a sense, it's almost like getting to know someone in real life. That as you get to know them more, as you spend more time together, you start to realize what they like, what they don't like, what their story was, what they're afraid of, what they hope for the future. And I think that constructing a character is not that different. It's just, instead of having it be totally external from you, you're bringing it up from within.
Judy?
I find my characters pretty much everywhere. Sometimes, I'll see a stranger and that person looks interesting and I think, ooh, I wonder about them. And again, I've used rarely family, but I've certainly used friends and people I know and people I've worked with and all kinds of people. Of course, you just take certain things about them and then you embroider the rest. You don't use that whole character. Mm-hmm. But I think that's good. But the strangest thing that ever happened to me was, and that was again in the Woman in Jeopardy book, this woman came and she started talking over my shoulder and telling me her story. And, pretty soon, about 150 pages in, she stopped. I said, hey, wait a minute, you can't do that. She said, you'll figure it out. But it was a really strange experience. I've never had that before.
I had that same thing happen. The character just took over and started talking. And in chapter 19, she left.
Yeah. I'm glad I'm not the only one.
You're the writer, it's your problem.
That's right.
It's funny. Usually I meet most of my characters when I travel. I travel a lot. And in airports, getting on the bus, waiting to go places. That's where in fact, I found such a fantastic character. I was sitting on a bus going to the airport, and I looked outside and the window, and I saw this gentleman standing there. He had a long black leather coat on, black patch on his eye. He had a huge black hat on, a very heavy metal t-shirt, had a big brace on his knee that was over jeans and boots. And he stood there with long, scraggly blonde hair. And I said, oh my God, don't sit next to me. And I put my backpack next to me on the seat, prayed that he didn't. And then he didn't get on the bus. And then I made him one of my main villains and I called him the General. And he had the creaky knee and he couldn't see out of the one eye. And then later on, I found out here he was a poet on the Cape. And I said, you cannot imagine, but believe me, at the time, I said, please don't sit next to me. But it's very interesting but that's where I find a lot of my characters, just traveling and looking and asking myself, gee, what if, or, that could happen. Those people, I bet you she's got something in that purse that she doesn't want anybody to see. So that's what I do.
Here's a question about how you come up with your characters or meet your characters. But real quick though, Barbara, with the black patch, here's a fun fact. Yesterday was something about Pirates Day.
Like a pirate day.
Talk like Pirate Day. And I heard somebody mentioned on the TV that the reason why they wore a black patch over one eye was to keep their night vision in one eye, so that when they're down in the holds or something, the captain goes down in the hold, or they're, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but just, you mentioned the
you can't look out of a peephole with two eyes. You got to have one. So maybe they would focus and strengthen that.
Yeah.
Goodness, who knows?
So back to our discussion here. So those who write historical fiction, obviously you get your characters from history. Have any of you made your characters or the historical figure? First of all, how much research do you do into your historical character, the historical person, to put in your book that people can say, oh yeah, I know that, or want to go research more about that person? And have you ever made that person the main character of your book, or is it more revolve around that historical figure? And again, how much research did you do to accurately portray those characters?
I'll start answering that if you'd like, Chris. all of my academic work was in history. So I have been fairly obsessive about getting things right. And that's really difficult because we don't really know much about the past. We think we do, but we don't. And so I have really two periods that I write about. I write about the Middle Ages and I write about World War II period. And World War II obviously is a little bit easier to research, although my academic work was in medieval history, so I feel comfortable there. But I do think that it's important to find ways that you can still have people relate, your readers relate to the people in the past. That's why we do historical fiction. It's so that you don't have a list of dates and battles and all the things that you learn in class. It's so that you can sort of enter into the period through someone. And by and large, I've done that through a fictional person who was observing or then participating in other sort of earth-shattering historical events that have taken place. When I have written about people who actually lived, though, you could do that forever. I mean, I am constantly thinking, oh, I wish I could go back and write a little bit more about that character because I learned a little bit more about that character. So that's one of the things that bothers you when you can't go to sleep at night. But I think that the major thing, to bring it back to our topic tonight, is to find ways of making a different environment feel familiar to the reader, whether that's a historical era or whether it's a police station or whether it's whatever, you know, the venue is and the time period is, and all the things that go together in those are, make them familiar to the reader so that it's not like they end the book and say, oh my goodness, now I'm an expert on the Middle Ages, you know, France in the 1300s is just my cup of tea. But it's so that they could see that these aren't cardboard figures, you know, as we were talking about, that the past is filled with people who are just like us in good and bad ways. And that does take a huge amount of research. Yes, lots and lots.
I find my best source of looking at relating to people, I want to find out what they ate, how they dressed, what they did for a living, and how they died, which is very important. You'd be surprised. And the best way to find that out is go to your town hall. And well, not now, but you could, but I like to go in and look at their records, and they'll tell me occupations, they'll tell me what people died from and so on. And you can just tell what they ate. And so that I want to relate to people that they can understand, oh, that's how they ate this, you know, or whatever. And it's funny, I finished the book was in 1900 and from Provincetown, a lot of it's centered in there. And they really didn't drink the coffee. Each woman in the town of Provincetown around that time made their own special coffee because they couldn't get the cocoa beans. So they would make them out of oh, what's that? What's that? It's a famous, everybody likes that flavor of hazelnut. And so they would make coffee out of that. And every woman down the street would have their specialty at each restaurant or whatever. So I didn't know that. You know, I just figured they would drink coffee, but they didn't. So it's just interesting, you know, and that's what you do. A lot of research, a lot of research. Who else?
I wrote a book. It's not a mystery. It was a historical kind of romance based on an incident in my mother's life. Talk about stealing characters. And it was set in 1928 California. And I did a huge amount of research, you know, on everything, the clothes, the language, the culture, how corrupt California was at the time, because that's where it was set. And I had some of my mother's scrapbooks and diaries and letters and things. And that was really so much fun. And then we went out there and we did on the ground research, which was very helpful. Nothing beats being there, I tell you. And the same thing in East Germany, which was much more recent history. But my World of Mirrors book was set there the year after the wall came down. And we went over there. That was a vacation where we had to go back the next year because I decided a book was there. And it was very interesting. We even interviewed some of the people, you know, kind of turned over the country back to Germany. and, you know, the boats, the food, everything. And it was so interesting. It was told this island was totally unspoiled, and it was unspoiled because the East Germans had no money. And so they couldn't do anything. There was one resort there and that was it. And that turned out to be a good thing because they had ruined all the old houses and the old casinos and the old bars and everything. They were still there. But I enjoyed doing research to that. I had a whole shelf of books up here because I like to do research. I probably should have been an academic. I'm not. Anyway, I find doing research really interesting, and there's almost no book that you don't have to do some research for, I have found.
Right. What
So,
about you, Kate?
well, I do not write historicals. I think the farthest back we go is that Joe Burgess's are not contemporary, but probably about 9 years earlier. And, you know, he is a Vietnam vet, and, you know, like Harry Bosch, there is the problem of they get too old, and so you have to kind of fudge a little bit. But beyond sort of, you know, memories of war and having to do research about what it was like to fight. And, you know, our generation knew that anyway, because everybody, you know, the guys all got drafted. So we have another essential character that we haven't talked about yet, which is the victim. Sometimes the victim is a very sympathetic victim. Sometimes the victim is somebody who is so detestable that the reader is probably glad that they're dead and says, well, who cares who killed them? But, or, you know, we have the challenge of the victim, how they died, why they died, and what we can tell the readers about them and what we want the readers to feel, which is a really interesting challenge. You know, I have the darkest books here, I'm sure. I have child victims. I have child victims and police officers who basically go to their boss and say, please don't give me another child. My soul can't take it. So I've got, you know, that, but, you know, when you try to reconstruct the life of somebody who's been killed, it becomes, you know, a really interesting challenge because they have a backstory. They have, you know, we have to investigate who had reasons to kill them. You know, why were they killed? And so that we have to sort of develop all those attributes, just like we had to do that with the bad guy. They have to be complicated. It's not a straightforward thing. So I would love it if you would talk to me a little bit about your bad guys or your victims and why you chose that victim and how you developed that victim.
What's especially tricky, I think, about that is that most murders take place at the very beginnings of our books. They're, you know, it's sort of the murder that starts out the narrative, and so, you know, you begin with this, and yet, in a sense, that's also an ending because there is a whole story that led up to this person being killed. So that's very tricky because you have to develop them differently from characters who you're seeing in a day-to-day kind of way. Your protagonist, you know, their best friend, you know, the red herrings, the bad guy, that sort of thing. You're sort of seeing them live through the pages as your narrative progresses, but you don't have that with the victim because they're already dead. So how do you make that backstory come alive in a sort of secondary way because they're not there to tell you about it? And there are, you know, a whole bunch of techniques, obviously, that we use. I've sometimes used the letter, you know, the letter that you discover from the victim or that somebody wrote to the victim so that you're getting a sense almost of them through their own words, which is the closest you can get to that narrative you're getting and dialogue you're getting with the other characters. But I do think that is one of the trickiest people to get right because you do want to make sure that the stakes are high enough, you know, that the ante's high enough that that this person, in a sense, was deserving, quote unquote, of death. There was enough reason something had gone so far awry that someone felt they had to kill them. They had no other way out of a situation. And then make that person as complex and as morally ambiguous, if that's what the theme is, or whatever it is, to make them come alive in ways that the others already are, is very, very tricky. I agree.
Well, I find one of the things that's really interesting about that development, as you say, because we can't talk to the person, is that you develop them by talking to other people.
Yes, yes.
And that lets us, the writer, play around with the people who are telling the truth and the people who are lying, and the whole question of why they're lying. But, sometimes your victim is very, it's just heartbreaking. And sometimes your victim is just, they deserve to die, let's move on. But we don't do that. So tell me about a victim, Judy.
I'm thinking of my latest book, and the first victim was a captain of industry who was a father with a very nice wife. And he was also a serial adulterer, which made him somewhat less sympathetic. But he was very concerned about what was happening to his company. He knew that somebody was sabotaging something. And so, there was the good and the bad to him. And it wasn't too difficult to kind of dig into where he was coming from and what had been going on in his life, which was helped solve, not only his murder, but a computer crime that had taken place. The other victim was a total lowlife who was a pornographer and, took pictures of women on the sly and had a big porn collection and was very kind of a disgusting character. And he was the one who had left the life insurance policy for his son, which kind of redeemed him, but there wasn't too much about him to redeem.
Yeah, my books are a little bit different. I really don't have any murders up front. Usually what I have are my villains are seeking a goal. They're looking for something. And my victims that occur usually happen midway, and they're just because they're in the way of the goal. And they have to be done away with in order to progress further into the story. So the villain does away with them, but you've already sort of met them a little bit. So it's a little bit different for my books, because you're right. But I usually put in the beginning what people are kind of looking for, but it's not usually a murder per se. The murders happen just because they're in the way.
I have a really, it may seem random, but I've got a question for all of you. And it's very simple, but it's one of the things that really makes me crazy is, how do you choose your names for your characters?
Oh yeah, those are fun.
Great question.
I have such a tough time with that.
I think we all do. And I think that sometimes, you try a name and it doesn't work. And so the story doesn't work. So you try another name and the story doesn't work. But, I think we've all taken part in those making a mystery, things where when the audience gives you a list of 7 names and you try to turn those into characters for the mystery we're composing on the fly, names are so suggestive. Right. And they're suggestive of era. They're suggestive, as you can tell sort of what sort of ethnic backgrounds and culture and when people were born, or whether they were named after an elderly relative. There's all of that. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, the names are interesting. In fact, they have such a thing online. You could go, it's called a random name generator. You put in the time period, and there's a whole list of names that can come up, and you can just pick and choose that. But that's the easy way out.
Is that any time period?
Yeah, put in the time period that you're looking at.
So you can
put, it's called a random name generator or a quick name generator. Either one. It's a website. It's free. You can just go in and find that. But your names have to be particular to the time period you're writing in.
Right. Yeah.
And that's real important.
Oh,
and unless you want to have a real odd name, and that would be usually a bad guy. So he would have a very odd name that doesn't fit into that time period, but it certainly does fit him or her.
And there's a website that will tell you those popular 10 names of boys and girls for a certain, all of the, going back quite a ways, probably not 100 years, but just about if you're writing in this century, it's very nice to be able to look at those names.
It's also important not to give everybody the same first initial
Oh,
or a
yeah.
hard name, because
Oh,
you don't
right.
want anybody
Ah,
pulled out of your story if you give them an odd name to try to pronounce every time they pass over that name. And they're trying to struggle through it. Usually I just kind of blot it out and say, that's the person. But I don't say the name.
I'll
Oh,
raise my hand on that comment, because when I'm reading stories, if there's names that are hard to pronounce, it's a turnoff for me.
Yeah, I just
It,
kind of go right out of it. Right.
That, and when names are the same, James, John,
Yeah.
Joe,
Right.
it's okay. I get confused
unless they're triplets.
as to why. Yeah. So with your victims, have you ever started the story with a particular person in mind that is going to be your victim? Now, be it you're a plotter or a pantser, you have the idea of who the victim is, but then get a portion of the way, halfway through, close to the end, and realize that, you know what, I want to change my victim.
Ooh.
I've had the opposite. I've had the killer wrong.
Me too.
You know,
Oh.
I've gotten to the point where I met the killer and I was wrong. It was someone who would not have committed that crime. But when I went back through the book, everything was in place for the right killer. So it's really surprising what our unconscious does while we think we're working.
Right.
The only time I've ever had a change in murdering somebody is that I had to kill this guy as a bad guy. He was one of the bad guys. And I went to visit my sister and I stayed in a convent for about a week with sisters. And by the time I left the convent, I couldn't kill him. So I decided just to give him some terrible injuries and I sent him to prison instead. And so I really came out of that week changing because the sisters just kind of changed me a little bit and I couldn't kill him. And they had a big laugh about it because they knew I was there to write this chapter, that they knew I was going to do away with somebody. But yeah, it's hard to have something in mind. And then halfway through you say, I can't do this, or the other way around. This guy has got to go. I like him. I love this character, but he's got to go. And that's hard to do, but that's part of writing.
Right. So
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kate, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to agree with you actually that I've had to change the killer a couple of times because of my own intuition, and once because my editor said I had to, which was very embarrassing, I will say. I've never changed the victim, Chris, to answer your question, but I've added additional victims to a story where it wasn't quite enough and it was the right person, but I needed to, generate a little bit more suspense and generate some other actions for some other characters. So I've added a victim in so that there was more than one, but I've never actually changed the one because I think that's one of, the focal points for me is all right, this person needs to die. Why does this person need to die? So it becomes that specific around that person. They saw something, they knew something, they were blackmailing someone, whatever it was. At this particular moment, I could not wait. I could not let this person keep living. Why? I think to change the victim at that point would be really to change the whole structure of the story. So fortunately, I've never had to do that, but I have changed the killer.
Okay, what about characters who are meant to play minor roles who won't let you keep them down? Those, has no one had that happen?
I have, and I've actually had readers say that they want more of a certain character,
yes,
which is, both a compliment and puzzling sometimes because I didn't quite get why. I've introduced especially when you're writing a series, it's really easy to start some minor characters that then you either hope will develop into something major or will tell you that it's time for them to develop into something else. But yeah, I think that happens a lot.
Yeah, it's really interesting how in my first Thea Kozak mystery, I had a Maine State trooper, Maine State Police detective who was investigating her sister's death. And they really didn't like each other, but they sort of learned to get along. There was some attraction there. But my idea was that since this is a series with a strong female lead, she has to rescue herself. And if you let a cop get, too big a role in the book, he's going to want to be the rescuer.
Yeah.
So in the second book, I played him way down because it's Thea's book. And I got my editor, when she sent back, the notes on the manuscript, basically, it was like every fifth line was, and pump up the Andre quotient. Because it turns out that women readers are in love with Andre. And, I can't help it. He just obviously needed to play a bigger role. So, book 11, he's still there. And, but it is funny what our readers tell us, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, even the negative reviews, if you read whatever, if you get them, they will say something. And if two other or three other people say something similar, and it should give you something to think about. That, yeah, maybe they're, you're so close to it, and you don't see in the manuscript what's missing. Something's wrong, or just the other way around. Oh, I'm going to keep going with this idea because it's a good one and they all like it. So the good with the bad.
Have any of you ever gotten so emotionally involved with a character that when it does come time to kill them
Yes.
off, you're either extremely happy that you finally get to kill this person off because it's so well developed though, but
Yeah.
or you're extremely upset that, okay, it's time to do something with this character. Have you ever been emotionally involved
Yeah.
so much with the character?
Yeah. I have been. In fact, in the latest book, I had to kill off the main character in the old time. And I actually got really teary-eyed and I had to stop because I liked him so much, but he had to go. And there was no other way to end the story. And it's kind of interesting how that happens, and but then I got over with it. And of course, the characters, when you pick out your characters, you do have to pick them out carefully because they're going to live with you for a long time.
Absolutely.
It's still living with me. I'm trying to write the 5th novel, and the characters from the last book are still in my head. And I keep telling them, you're done. Get away. I'm done with you now. I've got to go on more here. And every once in a while, and I'll say, I'm really sorry I had to do away with you, but it was time. It was okay. So it's like kind of weird, I'm talking to myself, but I'm not really. I'm talking to the characters in my head. But it does happen.
I had a strange thing happen. When I started the Joe Burgess series, I sort of started it with a chip on my shoulder from a lot of people coming to book events and saying, I've always wanted to write a book, and someday when I have a free weekend, I'm going to. And I thought, okay, I don't know what they've got that I haven't. It takes me 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half.
Yeah.
So I decided to see how fast I could write a book. And so I started the Joe Burgess on January 2nd. And 4.5 months later, I had a 485-page manuscript.
Wow.
Too long, too much. I ended up having to cut 100 pages out of it. But basically, when I was done, I had spent so much more time with Joe Burgess and his partners, more time than I did with my family, because to write that much, you write all the time.
Right.
That when the book was done, I was lonely and I was sad, and I felt like my friends had abandoned me.
Yeah.
It was a very weird experience.
You go into that depression state just a little bit, getting up out of bed and say, well, what am I going to do today here? I don't have anything to write anymore. And then all of a sudden you get another idea and it starts circling in the back of your head. Okay, I'm going to keep going with another book now. But you're right. That happens.
I guess I'm more manipulative than you folks are. I'm not really that emotionally involved with people as much as I'm trying to elicit that emotional involvement on the part of my readers. So I'm constantly like, I've got this little bit of distance because I'm trying to tell a story with such interesting and compelling people that it will have someone teary-eyed, or it will have someone angry, or it will have some, I'm always aware of where I'm trying to bring the readers in. So I'm feeling very guilty right now because I'm feeling much more manipulative than the rest of you are.
Yeah, we're just poor
but I
victims of
say
our
that-
characters.
Yeah.
You know, I say that having experienced it myself as a reader, you know, that I get with it when it's a good writer, when it's a great writer, you get so emotionally involved and you cry when someone you care about, you know, either dies or has some sort of setback. So I'm always trying to translate that into my readers as well.
So
Mhm.
on a technical note now, especially Judy, you had mentioned way at the beginning that you also write short stories, and for everyone else who writes short stories as well, how is it different developing a character for a short story versus a full-length novel?
Well, you're not in it for the long haul. I mean, short story characters, yes, they should be good and they should be compelling, but you don't have, usually you don't have a long backstory for, which comes out in the course of the story. And it's kind of, I don't know. I right now I'm agonizing over some characters in a short story I started probably 10 years ago and never finished. But that's a different matter. But I like writing short stories, and the characters, you know, kind of come and go, and then once they're done, they're done. And you don't really agonize over them as much as you do in a novel.
Yeah, I think that, you know, I think it's Poe, but I could definitely be wrong, who said that everything in a short story should tend toward a single effect. And I think that there's an immense discipline that we have to bring to bear when we're trying to write a short story, because we don't have 350 pages to get to the point. The thing that I find hardest and most interesting about writing short stories is the character's voice. Until the character really begins to talk to me, I don't know what their story is. And I will write a short story and it's flat and it's not there. And I work it. And suddenly the character will just sort of take on this life and their voice becomes very clear. And I understand why it is their story and what it's about. It's a very different process for me.
It is.
I have a difficult time writing short stories. I have too much to say. And I just want to keep going on and on. And so it's difficult. I have a few, but I don't enjoy them as much as writing a full-length novel because I love the research part about it.
Sure.
It usually takes me 2 to 2.5 years to write a novel, period. That's how long it takes me. And I can't do it any less time because it's just too much research to see what's going on. But I admire people who can do the short stories, and then vice versa. They'll say, oh, I admire you. You can write 100,000 words. How do you stay close to it? And I said, yeah, it's easy. I like to do that. It just keeps going on and on.
So
I
Kate,
do think that it's trickier to do characters in a short story because there's so much of a possibility of them becoming those cardboard characters, of them, you know, being the good person and the bad person, and the, you know, it's so easy to just lean on that because you're trying to do so much in such a short period of time. So I think it's very challenging. I'm not sure it's as challenging to tell the story in a short story, but it is challenging to have really wholly developed, wonderful characters in a short story.
So Kate, you had mentioned way at the beginning too, that about keeping track of features, especially going from, if you have a series, going from book to book to book to make sure that your characters have the blue eyes or the particular characteristics. What do you all use to keep track? Do you use computer programs? Do you use folders? Do you use notes, sticky notes up on a board? Do you have pictures of people from magazines to remind you that this is what that character looks like? How do you keep track of all that?
Well, I mean, I think we all have to. I was very bad and didn't do a diary in the beginning. So now I often have to go back and read for the book I'm working on now, which is book 12 in the Thea series, I had to read 2 and 5. No, 2 and 6. just because that's where a character who occasionally recurs, I needed to go and see what I'd said about him earlier. As for pictures, it's really hilarious. People will send us pictures. They will say, this is Joe Burgess. But my favorite is the time that I found a picture that I was sure looked like Thea in a catalog, and I cut it out and I put it on my husband's desk, and he came home and picked it up and said, "What's this?" And I said, "That's Thea." And he said, "No, it's not. She doesn't look anything like that."
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I used to use, years ago when it first came out, I used a program called Scrivener, which helps you kind of sort things like that. I've sort of simplified my life since then, and I tend to just I'm a list keeper anyway. So I just keep a list. I've got a page per character and just a list of what they look like, what they don't like, all the things that, I mean, when you're creating a character, you want to think about their role, and you want to think about, what their purpose is in the book and all those things. But then you also want to get some of those details. You want to know, even if you don't actually use it in the book, you want to know what their favorite ice cream is,
Right.
because that informs you. So I tend to just keep those as lists now on paper, the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, I have the 3x5 cards in their colors. So one color is always one character, and I'll just jot down what happened, and another color is another character or whatever. And nothing spectacular, but just enough that I don't have to go flipping through the book to see what did I do there. Other than that, it's just those 3x5 cards. That helps.
Once we ran all over Brussels looking for the apartment where a certain character might live. And we walked and we walked and we walked, and finally we found it. And that was so rewarding, because I thought we're never going to find it. He's not a real person, it's not a real place, but I had to find the right place that guy lived. And there's been, and once I blew up a boat in one of the little harbors there, the docking places in the Charles and Cambridge on the Harvard side. And, that took some doing, and I would colleagues kind of walking by the harbor and looking at the boats and saying, well, could this happen? Could that happen? And, sure enough, it did. But, the crazy things you end up doing because your writing is always kind of amazing.
I had probably the strangest thing happen with the first Joe Burgess. I had written a scene where he goes to interview a witness, and he comes to this sort of, looks like a little house in the woods. And he walks in on the second floor and goes down a hall and downstairs, and he's in this enormous room, which is 2 stories with windows looking out on the water. And it's a sewing room, and there are bolts of cloth, and there are quilts hanging from the railings. And it was this really great room that I made up for him. And then we were house hunting, and we walked into that room.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Talk about scary.
Yeah, that's interesting. Interesting.
We
Yeah.
did not buy that house.
No.
No, too creepy.
No.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
When you have minority characters or ethnic characters, obviously you do a little bit of research, or some research for those characters, but do you use, when it comes time for editing, do you use sensitivity editors? I think that's what they're called, to make sure your portrayal of that ethnicity or that minority is accurate?
I do. When I started this series in 2016, and gave my protagonist a Muslim boyfriend. And at the time, it seemed really important to me, and it still is important to me. But in particular in 2016, it felt very important to me to be able to give a realistic representation of someone who is from Lebanon, who immigrated to the United States and who practices Islam. And I don't know enough. I mean, I've lived in Morocco, but doesn't mean I know I'm Catholic. So yes, I did myself, not my publisher, but I did on my own as I was writing it, employ someone. It wasn't a specific sensitivity reader who was looking at a wide spectrum of things, as many of them do. This was specifically someone who could advise me as to Islam and as to this Muslim person. But I think that's really important.
It is.
It's just so easy to get it wrong. It's so easy to get any of it wrong.
Yeah, in the last book that I finished, it involves 1900 Juneau, Alaska, and the native Alaskans, the Tlinkets. And I wanted to make sure that I had this all correct. So it took me almost 8 months, but I finally found an expert that would be willing to read to tell me if this was appropriate and is this insulting or is this okay and so on, and even some of the language that I put in. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't insult any of the Tlinkets that still live now today. And so it was really important for me to get that approval before I even would, send the book out anywhere. So yeah, that was important to do, to make sure I was not, I was just being very careful.
Anybody else?
I think we're up.
Okay. Well, we have about 10 minutes left. So Kate, I wanted to ask first, was there anything else that you wanted to touch on as far as?
No, I think that, I mean, we've done a pretty good job on
Good job.
victims, bad guys, good guys. The only thing, and minor characters who interfere and minor characters who don't. I think the only other thing that we could talk about, if anybody wanted to, would be witnesses. All of those people that your characters talk to in order to put a story together, to give the background of the victim, give the background of the bad guy, the timelines, all those professionals and and civilians that pop up in our books. And that really is a research question. Who do you, and we've just talked about that with sensitivity, who do you go and talk to in order to make sure that it feels credible?
When I had a scene where the FBI raided an office locally, I talked to an FBI man who told me what would happen and what exactly would take place. And that was so helpful because I used practically everything he said, things I would never have known. Like if they find a knife on the premises, that's considered a weapon and they take it along, whether it has anything to do with the raid or not. And, some of these really kind of obscure things. And it was so useful. And I was so glad that I did it.
I've used a few people, in other words, just in making sure, again, I don't write the police procedurals. And so I have to go and sit down with my local detective here in town and ask them questions and make sure that I'm doing this proper 911 calls, because I've never really made a 911 call in my life,
Well, you're
so
lucky.
I had to figure out. I did have one just about 3 nights ago, first time, and sure enough, I'm supposed to emulate the character in my book. She kind of resembles me a little bit, and I'm giving the 911 call, and I gave him the wrong address, an address that was from our house 30 years ago.
Because you get so nervous.
I'm supposed to be so cool and calm. And I said, yeah, it's 9155. Yeah, in Brewster. There's no such number as this in Main Street. And I repeated it twice. My husband says, honey, that's the wrong number. That's the old, oh my God, I was supposed to be very cool and calm, and it didn't happen. So I really do. I have to go sit, and I took the police, the school, all that to make sure. And I called detectives in Hyannis on the Cape to make sure I was doing this properly, right? And archaeologists, that is a local one. And I didn't know we didn't have medical examiners on the Cape. We have to go through Boston, and it takes that long for them to come out to the Cape. I didn't know that. So those are all things that are important. And then I could reference them then, because she's learning also in the book. She's learning the procedures of what to do. I don't want to make mistakes, right?
So with a couple minutes, oh, go ahead, Jeannette.
No, it's fine. I just was going to add to that, just not just the content, but also when you interview people who you're going to use similar characters in your book, to listen to like their speech patterns what they sound like.
Mhm.
You know, to look around their kitchen and see, you know, how the kitchen of the wife of a Portuguese fisherman is going to be very different from the kitchen where I grew up, for example.
Right.
So to kind of, you know, be able to interpret things besides just the facts and procedures, but also to get an ambiance and language and the kinds of things that you know, make the novel pop and make your story come alive.
Yeah, I think that, you know, just like with the guy, the straggly blonde hair in the black trench coat, you know, the world is full of characters for us to
Mhm.
steal.
Mhm.
And when I teach writing, I make my students carry index cards and come in and sort of bring us a character every week when we have a
Nice.
class meeting,
Yeah.
just to sort of say, you know, what did you see? What
Yeah.
did you hear? What did you
Yeah.
smell? How do you engage the reader's senses? But you can't do any of that if you aren't actually out there looking, if you're not
Right.
paying attention.
That's right.
Right. Have to pay attention.
So this, I guess, will be the last question of the night. I had interviewed a mystery writer back in May, which shameless plug now. All our interviews can be seen on our YouTube channel. Kate's one of them. Jeanette's another one. Uh, her main character is a cat.
Oh,
Have
cool.
any of you thought about the protagonist or other characters writing stories through the eyes of an animal?
I've
I
thought,
haven't, but Spencer, you know, Spencer Quinn does.
well, those
And
are
I
so
had a
funny.
student, what?
Those are so funny. I just read
And they
one.
are so funny that the detective is a dog. I had a student once who, you know, when we were talking about protagonists, said, well, his protagonist, his story was the story of Noah's Ark, biblically correct, of course, he said, from the point of view of a young male elephant. And it just brought the house down.
Yeah. That's,
It was so sweet.
Yeah.
I've never really done that before, but what I have done though was put in a dog or a cat and then talked to them. And you'd be surprised, you have a dialogue without info dumping. You have a dialogue between the cat and the dog and you. I mean, I used to talk to I talk to my animals sometimes, you
I do
know,
all the
when nobody's
time.
around, you know, and it's sometimes you can use it as a good vehicle the other way around. I don't know if I could do it through the eyes of a dog or a cat, but I can certainly talk to them.
I wrote a series of poems in the voice of creatures of the Southwest desert, and that was really fun. We had visited out there, and you know, the rattlesnake and the rabbit and the bird, this and that. But I've thought about maybe doing something with a cat, but I've never done it, and so many other people have done it. It seems like it would be totally redundant to have another cat mystery.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
I
Chris, I think we're out of steam.
yep.
Start talking about cat mysteries.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to thank all of you for being a part of this. I'd like to thank everybody who is in our audience here, and we had a few on Facebook. This will be available to view on Facebook as well, and I'll have it up on our YouTube channel here shortly. Everybody's books are available through bookshop.org. It's a company that supports local bookshops by remitting by profit sharing from sales, and you can choose the bookshop in your area that you wish to support, or just jump among different ones. So bookshop.org is a great organization.
Yeah.
Anybody who has their books on audiobooks, libro.fm, same thing. They're a great company to work with. So Kate, Jeanette, Barbara, Judy, thank you very much. This
Thank
is
you
very
so much for
informative and
having us.
enjoyable.
Thank you.
For having
Appreciate
us.
it.
Chris.
It was nice. It was fun. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Mhm.